In 1848, one man owned more of Manhattan than anyone in history. Not a mayor, not a governor. A German butcher's son who arrived in New York with 7 flutes and $5. John Jacob Astor died with $110 billion in today's money. He didn't inherit it. He didn't marry it. He built a machine that printed wealth for 6 generations. And he did it with a contract so elegant, so ruthless, that the men who built his empire never realized they were building it for him. This is the system that bought Manhattan. The Vanderbilts had railroads. The Rockefellers had oil. The Morgans had banks. John Jacob Astor had something simpler: dirt. While other tycoons built machines that could rust, break, or become obsolete, Astor bought the one asset that could never be manufactured: land. Specifically, the 23 square miles that would become the most valuable real estate on Earth. But Astor didn't just buy land. He invented a system, a contract structure so sophisticated that tenants would spend their own money building houses on his property, then hand those houses to the Astor family for free. This is how a penniless immigrant built a dynasty that shaped American wealth for 200 years, and why that dynasty eventually abandoned everything he built. Johann Jakob Astor arrived in America in 1784. He was 20 years old, spoke broken English, and carried everything he owned in a single wooden crate. 7 flutes to sell, a few pounds sterling, and a plan. His older brother had established a butcher shop in New York. Johann, soon to call himself John Jacob, could have joined him. Steady work, modest income, the safe path. He chose differently. During his Atlantic crossing, a fellow passenger had explained the fur trade. The numbers were extraordinary. A beaver pelt purchased from trappers in the Great Lakes cost roughly $1. That same pelt sold in London for $6. In Canton, China, where beaver fur lined the robes of mandarins, 25 to 1, Astor had found his lever. Within 2 years, he was trudging through Iroquois territory himself, not as a tourist, as a trader. He learned enough Seneca and Mohawk to negotiate directly with trappers, eliminating every middleman between wilderness and market. The work was brutal. Weeks in frozen backcountry, rivers that could kill you in minutes, competitors who sabotaged shipments or made rivals disappear entirely. Astor survived by being more relentless than anyone else in the trade. Where others saw risk, he saw margin. By 1800, he controlled more of the American fur trade than any individual in history. His American Fur Company established posts from the Great Lakes to the Pacific Northwest. Astoria, Oregon, the first American settlement on the West Coast, still bears his name. He had built a commercial empire spanning half a continent. But Astor understood something that separated him from every other trader in the business. Fur was a commodity. Commodities rise and fall. Beaver hats were fashionable in 1800. They might not be in 1850. He needed to convert volatile profits into permanent wealth. And there was another trade route. Darker, more profitable, more controversial. Opium. Astor's ships carried furs to Canton, China. They returned carrying tea and silk for American markets. But the ships heading to China also carried Turkish opium, purchased legally in the Mediterranean and sold into the Chinese market. This was decades before the Opium Wars made such trade infamous. At the time, it was simply commerce. Brutal, profitable commerce. Historians debate the scale of Astor's involvement. He was never the largest opium trader, but the profits supplemented his fur income during critical years. The seed capital had to come from somewhere, By 1810, John Jacob Astor had liquid capital that most American businessmen couldn't imagine. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, cash that could move fast when opportunity appeared. So while his competitors reinvested in more furs, more ships, more trading posts, Astor did something unusual. He took his profits out of the business entirely, and he put them into dirt, into the empty fields north of New York City, into the grid that didn't exist yet. Manhattan in 1810 was not the Manhattan we know. Below Canal Street was developed. Everything above was farmland, swamp, and forest. Most investors considered it wasteland, too far from the docks, too far from commerce. Astor saw something else entirely. He saw a map of future fortunes. He began buying, not buildings, land, specifically undeveloped lots north of the existing city, acres that wealthy New Yorkers dismissed because they were miles from the commercial district, land so cheap that sellers thought they were taking advantage of the German immigrant. Astor's thesis was simple. New York's population was doubling every decade, 60,000 in 1800, 96,000 in 1810, 150,000 by 1820. The city had nowhere to expand except north. Geography guaranteed it. Today's farmland was tomorrow's downtown. He just had to wait. But his genius wasn't buying land. It was what he refused to do with it. Astor almost never sold. And when developers wanted to build on his property, he didn't partner with them. He didn't finance their projects. He leased. The Astor ground lease was a 21-year contract. The terms were elegant and devastating. A tenant would lease the land from Astor for a fixed annual rent. The tenant was then responsible for constructing any buildings on that land at their own expense, using their own credit, taking their own risk. They could live in those buildings. They could rent them to others. They kept all the rental income for 21 years. But when the lease expired, everything changed. The land and everything built upon it reverted to the Astor family. The houses, the improvements, the infrastructure, all of it became Astor property. Automatically. No negotiation, no compensation. The tenant had spent 2 decades building Astor's empire for him. Consider what this meant in practice. A developer in 1825 might lease a plot of Astor land on what is now Midtown. He would borrow money to construct a brownstone. He would spend years finding tenants, collecting rent, maintaining the property. If he was smart and lucky, he would profit handsomely for 2 decades. Then 1846 arrives. The lease expires, and the developer watches as the building he financed, constructed, and maintained becomes the permanent property of the Astor estate. He walks away with nothing but his memories. The Astors walk away with a free building on increasingly valuable land, and Astor could then release that same property, now improved with a building he hadn't paid for, at dramatically higher rates, or renegotiate with the existing tenant who faced losing everything if they refused the new terms. The leverage was absolute. Why would anyone accept these terms? Because in rapidly growing Manhattan, even a 21-year lease was profitable. Tenants calculated correctly that rental income over 2 decades would exceed their construction costs. They made money. They just made less than Astor. He collected ground rent for 21 years without spending $1 on construction. Then he collected the building itself. Then he collected higher rent on the improved property. Forever. The system was self-compounding. Every expired lease made the portfolio more valuable. Every building constructed made the next lease more expensive. The machine fed itself. At his death in 1848, John Jacob Astor owned nearly 500 separate parcels of Manhattan real estate. His estate was valued at $20 million. To understand that number, consider this. It represented roughly 1/15 of all currency circulating in the entire United States. One man, 1/15 of the nation's money supply. His will was precise. The core real estate holdings were to remain intact, managed by trustees, never sold. The Astor fortune would not be a pile of cash for heirs to spend. It would be a system for heirs to operate. His son, William Backhouse Astor, inherited the machinery. William understood his job was not to innovate, it was to maintain. He expanded the portfolio methodically. He continued the ground lease system without deviation. He avoided debt. He avoided speculation. He avoided anything that might threaten the compounding engine his father had built. By his death in 1875, the Astor fortune had doubled again. The system worked exactly as designed. But something else was changing, something the founder never anticipated. The family was drifting from operations to ornament, from landlords to socialites. And nobody embodied this shift more completely than Caroline Schermerhorn Astor. Caroline never managed a single property, never negotiated a lease, never reviewed a rent roll. She married into the third generation of Astor wealth, and she transformed what the name meant entirely. Caroline's project was not real estate, it was social architecture. She became the gatekeeper of New York high society, creating what she called the 400, the family's acceptable for invitation to her annual ball. The number supposedly reflected her ballroom's capacity. It actually reflected her power. If you weren't on Caroline's list, you weren't in society. Your business suffered. Your children couldn't marry well. Your reputation stalled. Doors closed. Opportunities vanished. She had converted inherited wealth into social authority. This was a different kind of dynasty building. Not economic. Social. And it had a cost the family didn't recognize until too late. The generation that built the system spent their days reviewing lease agreements, surveying properties, calculating which blocks would appreciate fastest. The generation that inherited it spent their days planning dinner parties and competing with European aristocracy for status nobody outside their circle cared about. The Astor men of the Gilded Age became famous for their yachts, their country estates, their marriages to European nobility. William Waldorf Astor, the founder's great-great-grandson, grew so frustrated with American society that he renounced his citizenship entirely. He moved to England, became a British Viscount, founded a newspaper dynasty, and took significant Astor capital with him across the Atlantic. Every dollar that left New York was a dollar no longer compounding in Manhattan real estate. The machine was leaking, but the most revealing decision came from Caroline's own branch of the family. In 1893, the Astors made a choice that would have horrified the founder. They sold. The family owned land at the corner of Fifth Avenue and 34th Street, prime Manhattan. Exactly the kind of asset John Jacob Astor had spent his entire life accumulating, and his will had explicitly forbidden selling. The ground lease system depended on never selling. That was the whole point. Caroline's branch of the family sold it to developers who built a hotel, the Waldorf Astoria. The Astors didn't build it. They didn't own it. They didn't operate it. They sold the land and licensed their name. They traded a permanent income-generating asset for a one-time payment and a sign on a building someone else owned. It was the exact opposite of everything the founder had built. He bought land and never sold. They sold land for naming rights. The system designed to compound forever had been traded for prestige and quick cash. Meanwhile, the real estate empire faced competition the founder never anticipated. Other families had watched. Other families had learned. The Rhinelanders adopted ground leases and accumulated blocks east of Fifth Avenue. The Gaulets built a portfolio rivaling the Astors in scale. Trinity Church, the oldest parish in Manhattan, deployed the same contract structures on its vast land holdings. The monopoly eroded. The Astors had invented the game, but they no longer owned it. And the Astor heirs, comfortable with their inheritance, failed to adapt. They didn't expand aggressively into Brooklyn or the Bronx. They didn't innovate new financial structures. They didn't acquire competitors. They managed what they had, barely. The family had shifted from offense to defense, and defense in real estate means slow decline. Then came the fractures inherent to any family fortune. Multiple heirs, multiple branches, multiple ideas about what the money should do. The founder's will had tried to keep the empire intact, but wills last one generation at most. His grandchildren rewrote the terms. His great-grandchildren rewrote them again. With each generation, concentrated fortune became scattered inheritance. The unified empire became dozens of separate trusts, each managed differently, each with different goals. And then there was John Jacob Astor IV. The founder's great-great-grandson was among the wealthiest men in America when he boarded the RMS Titanic in April 1912. He was returning from a European honeymoon with his young second wife, Madeline. He was 47 years old. He was worth roughly $90 million. In today's money, nearly $3 billion. When the ship struck the iceberg, Astor reportedly helped his pregnant wife into a lifeboat, asked if he might join her given her condition, was told no men could board, and stepped back without protest. He was last seen standing on deck, smoking a cigarette. His body was recovered a week later. His death didn't destroy the fortune, but it accelerated everything already breaking. Estate taxes claimed a significant portion. Settlements for his widow took more. Trusts for his children fragmented the holdings further. The concentrated wealth of 1848 had become the scattered inheritance of 1912. By mid-century, no single Astor controlled anything resembling the original empire. The family remained wealthy, but wealthy now meant comfortable, not commanding. Here's the question worth asking. What if they hadn't sold the Waldorf Astoria site? What if they'd maintained the ground lease system on that corner of 5th and 34th for another century? That single parcel, held and compounded under the founder's model, would be worth billions today. One decision, one deviation from the system, billions in foregone wealth. John Jacob Astor built one of the most sophisticated wealth generation systems in American history. A machine that converted beaver pelts into Manhattan dirt, then converted Manhattan dirt into self-building brownstones that his family collected for free. The system worked for 3 generations. Then it stopped. Not because it broke, because the family stopped operating it. The fracture pattern is clear in retrospect. The founder built, his son maintained, his grandchildren defended, his great-grandchildren spent, each generation further from the original insight, further from the cold calculations in Iroquois territory, further from the discipline that refused to sell. They inherited the wealth. They never inherited the instincts that created it. There's a lesson here that extends beyond real estate. Systems outlive their creators only when someone chooses to keep operating them. Wealth that compounds requires someone at the controls. When heirs become passengers instead of pilots, the compounding stops. The machine doesn't break. It simply drifts. John Jacob Astor arrived in America with 7 flutes and $5. He died owning 1/15 of the money in circulation. His descendants still live comfortably across 2 continents, but the empire, the actual machinery of ground leases and concentrated Manhattan real estate, exists now only in the history books. The system didn't fail. The family moved on. And that might be the most human ending of all. Next time on The Silent Citadel, the Rockefellers, the family that studied the Astors, learned what they did right and built a system designed never to break.